Hosts, Pastor Kent Smith, Pastor Trent Smith, Kayla Smith, and Alex Shirley. Thank you so much for joining us as we dive into a new episode.
Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good
Bubba is back with us.
Talk to us about Bubba.
Welcome, Bubba.
Bubba, this time Bubba has his friend Junior with him. And they are trying to get the measurements of a flagpole. So they're standing at the base of it, and a woman walks by, and she said, "What are y'all doing?" He said, "Well, ma'am, we're trying to get the measurements of this flagpole, but we forgot our ladder." So she just looks at him. She pulls out a wrench out of her purse. She lays the flagpole down, unscrews the bolts, all that, takes a measurement out of her purse, and she announces very loudly, "It's 18 feet and 6 inches. She walks away. Junior has his arms folded, and he said, "Ain't that just like a blonde?" He said, "We were asking for the height, and she gave us the length."
Well, we had
Junior wasn't very smart.
Oh, my.
We had a good run until this week. They can't all be good jokes.
Well, she giggled when she told it, so you knew it was
So
gonna
that
be
makes
cute.
it, yeah. Awesome. Well, welcome, everybody. All those who are listening, you won't notice a difference. All those who watch, hope for the soul.
So, hope for the soul.
Hope for the soul, y'all. Hope for the soul. We are finally, after 3 years or 4 years, how long have we been doing this? This is 3 years?
This is third year.
We finally have a permanent spot. No setup and tear down.
Every week, set up and that's a hard job for me, too,
I don't want to hear it.
because I usually sit down in that chair and y'all kind of do it around me.
Yeah, we
So.
roll you around, get you out of our way.
But I do want to compliment, I want to give us all a pat on the back for a fine job that we did here
Oh, yeah.
in this room. I did offer to buy lunch the very last day, and my offer for lunch was rejected. So we've done a great job on this room.
Yeah. Well, we're not done, but we're done enough to record. So we're excited to be in here. All right. So our topic for today is, and you weren't here last week.
No, I wasn't.
Well, welcome back.
Well, thank you for letting me come back. I don't know if I'm going to be allowed to come back one of these days.
No, that's dumb. That's dumb. All right. So today we're talking about, what are we talking about, girls? Kayla's already zoned out. She's told her joke. She's done.
We're talking about the call to ministry.
The call to ministry. So I think this is not a call to be a preacher. This is a call to ministry, a call to service. And first and foremost, I think it's very important that we recognize long before a person is a preacher, they're a minister. And some people will be ministers and never be preachers. So we're talking about the call to ministry today. Alex, talk to us a little bit. Lead us and guide us through.
So basically, we're talking about when you feel that calling, when you feel that stirring, like God's calling you a different or a separate way, or into ministry. Once you feel that calling, sometimes it's a big moment, like in an altar or whatever. Sometimes it's just a nudge. But what's next from that? Like, what are some practical tools from our perspective of like where you can start? Because a lot of times it's just like, I don't even know where to begin. I feel called to do this, but I don't know how to start going about this, or I don't know how to understand what's been called of me. So
That's good.
just kind of pursuing that.
I think when someone begins to have those feelings that they may be called but don't understand it, first off, it's a confusing moment, and nobody really understands it at first. So I think if someone is consecrating their heart and life to God, and they're in their alone times, they're saying, "Lord, whatever you want me to do." I think that probably one of the first stops, the first conversations they need to have is with a pastor, and say, here I am, and I'm not certain what my future holds, but don't even know if I have a calling, but I want to open myself up for that. So where do I start? And uh, many pastors are going to tell you a different pathway, but I think that that initial conversation has to be, I'm interested. I think I might be called, and how do I discover that? And so most times, I think the ability to be used of God is more about availability
That's just what I was about to say.
than it is
Availability.
ability. Because when you consecrate yourself to the Lord, you're willing to everything else supports that habit. Your education, your job, whatever you're involved in, that becomes secondary to the kingdom. And there are many people who will not understand that. If a young person is 20 years old, 21 years old, maybe finishing college, didn't go to necessarily a Bible college, but they're beginning to search, what's my next step? Many times, parents and other influencers, they're not real excited if if a young person decides, hey, I think I'm going to give all this education and pursue a calling. That's a lot of times hard for some people to accept. But whenever anyone is willing to literally say, God, I put it all on the table for you, and we'll figure out what that means down the road. But I'm making myself available.
Availability is huge, and I think a big part of being available is just recognizing that you're set apart. Like whenever you acknowledge that God has something for you, or you want to take the next step in leadership in a church or whatever that may look like. First off, ministry, it will always be around a church at some form. It might not be in a church. It might be outside evangelism, or outside evangelism, or inside ministry, however that looks. It will always be tied to a church, because God's coming back for the church, his bride. So first off, that means we have to be submitted. We have to fall in line with the authority that God has outlined in his kingdom. And we will never go far in ministry if we can't fall in line under God's authority in our life. Brother Huntley was here this past weekend, and he's so famous for saying this: you can't be right with the master if you're not right with the pastor. Now, there's two ditches on each side of that road. There is a very domineering, abusive approach to that. Like, if you don't bless God, if you don't do what I say, and you don't submit to me, and you're not, if when I hand you a broom, or I think we've talked about this before, if I hand you a mop or a lawnmower or a weed eater and you refuse to do it, then you're not called. Well, if you refuse to do it, there's probably some truth to that, because the call to ministry is availability. But the flip side is as ministers, we can't abuse people just because they say they're called. The other side of that ditch is a bucking of submission from people who say they're called. Well, I'm called, so I'm just going to go do my own thing. And so I think there is a tension there where, Dad, people in your position or my position, we can't abuse people and manipulate them to do what we want because they say they're called. But likewise, people who feel a call to ministry and are taking the next step in what God has for them, their next step never outpaces their pastor. And so that's very, 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 very important. But we have to be set apart. And when we're set apart, that's what holiness is. We're being set apart unto God. We're separating ourselves from the world to God. But in ministry, we have to set our part. We have to set ourselves aside and say that, hey, not only am I going to live a life of holiness, I'm going to live a life. You talked about this recently, of the second mile, and I'm going to be here early and I'm going to be here late, and I'm going to set myself apart, not so I can look good, but so that I can do anything and everything that needs done in a church, at an event, or whatever the circumstance calls for that day, I'm just going to be there, and whatever needs done, I'm just going to make sure it gets done.
What does availability look like? And maybe a practical way to discuss availability to me would be around the church, be first in, last out.
Yeah.
First in, last out. That's you don't necessarily have to be the first person there, but you can be in the first wave. And you don't have to be the last person out the door, but there needs to be somebody that's those people that are rising up in leadership. They just tend to be the last out. Many years ago, I worked at a church. This was before either the kids were born, and we lived in a parsonage over behind the church. And so one of our responsibilities was to lock everything up, and we would work our way from the front door to the church, lights, air conditioner, front door, work our way out the back door. And there was a fellow there that wanted the kingdom. And it was a long shot. It's a long shot for him to be in the kingdom. But he wanted it bad. And literally,
And when you say kingdom, you mean ministry.
Ministry.
Not the kingdom of
Yeah,
God.
yeah,
Okay,
the ministry.
There you go.
But he wanted that very bad. And so literally every service, I would work him all the way to the front door. I would close the front door and lock the front door, and then make my way through the church. It'd take, 3 or 4, 5 minutes to work my way through the church, all the lights, all the air conditioning, get to the back door that pointed right towards our house. Inevitably, by the time I worked my way through the church and at the back door and was locking that door, that fellow would pop around from the front, and he'd be waiting on me at the back door. And then I would have to say farewells all over again. And it was a humorous thing. It was a bothersome thing. But now that man leads a ministry in Central America that is mind-blowing. And I never would have thought it, but it was his whole availability. I'm going to be the last one out, and when you're trying to leave, I'm going to be in between you and the door. And I don't think you have to be as maybe difficult or as graphic as his illustration, but if you're really interested in the kingdom and you want to know if you have a calling on your life, then being a servant leader is not a problem.
I'm glad that story took a good turn, because I thought we were throwing somebody under the bus for a minute. But yeah, so the guy may have been a little bothersome to you, but the principle stays true whenever you're faithful. God sees that, and God sees your heart, and God sees your spirit. All right, so let's talk about acknowledging and understanding the call. That's what we've just talked about. Now let's move to preparing. What do we have to do? I think it's important that we make a plan. And firstly, we have to ask ourselves this question: how am I leading me? If I'm not leading me well, are other people going to follow me?
Is that the last thing you want to talk about today? Because we can talk about that for the rest of the week.
Well, that's just point 2 of that's point 2 of 3. So that's
first and foremost. If you can't lead yourself, you can't lead others.
Yeah.
And if you can't, if you're not able to consecrate yourself in such a way to be that second and third mile person, don't be surprised if other people don't acknowledge your call. The verse says in Proverbs or Ecclesiastes, he says, a man's gift maketh room for him, and then brings him before great men. And so if you are acknowledging a call or desiring a call, if there's a gift of something in you, a gift of ministry, serving, or whatever this is, the gift maketh room for itself. I mean, if that calling is there, it's going to be manifest, and then others are going to notice it. It's kind of like the old timers would sit around and see some young boy around the church, and they say, that boy got a calling on his life. God going to use him. And that's kind of a graphic illustration of not only are you noticing, acknowledging a call, but others begin to acknowledge.
right.
And it's amazing. It's amazing. People don't understand the call of God. They may not comprehend it, but they recognize it. And it works two ways. They see someone who desires it, but it's not manifesting all the things that it requires. And they'll say, that boy wants to be a preacher, but he ain't got it. That's just kind of the old timer way to say it. But then the same thing works the other way. They will acknowledge, hey, the boy's growing. Lord's going to use him. And so if other people are not noticing this, then you need to cultivate it deeper in yourself. Dig deeper, work harder, pray more.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. That what you just said is good. There you go. I finally got it out. We have to ask ourselves, what am I developing in me? How am I making myself better? What am I doing that no one sees that's really going to make a big difference in my life? It's the small habits that we have that make big differences in our life. It's the small disciplines that we have that really set us apart. And we've heard it said, the devil's in the details, and the little details of our life matter. We can't live a life that's not disciplined during the week and then come in and expect that we're going to move and operate and be this grand and glorious guy when the cameras are on and the broadcast is going. Like, that's not how it works.
Last night in our first 5 minutes, the high five, give a shout out to Patrick Delana. We love you, Patrick.
Great guy.
He's in this process of developing a calling, and he's in the stage now where
He's stepping into it.
Other people are noticing it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in that stage. And opening our service last night, he talked about that the Chinese bamboo, that for the first 4 years, you see virtually no growth because all the growth is out of sight. It's all underground. But then in that 5th year, it can grow. I think you said 90 feet.
Yeah.
And so with a person that's pursuing the call, it may seem like it's slow on the front end because you're having to grow a root system that can sustain a storm. You're having to develop a relationship with God that indeed develops your unique spiritual giftings. Not everyone's going to be a preacher. And I think there's many people who look at the call of God and think that if they can't be the guy in the microphone at the peak service every week, that their image of what a calling might be is that, when in all reality, we may have a 30-minute sermon on Sunday, but there's a whole lot of hours left in the week.
Yep.
It's not very spiritual unless that you have the personal habits to develop that. And when you see someone have these huge moments when their callings are acknowledged, and when you see someone step into something incredible, you must rest assured that there are 10,000 hours of preparation that are unseen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the whole concept of mastery is to become master level of anything. You've spent 10,000 hours in studying and musician and athlete, whatever the area of expertise is, where you arrive at that point of success and mastery. The theory of a master's degree is you have been in school and studied for 10,000 hours. Okay, that's cool, but that's a lot. And a lot of time people are faithful God, they're good people, but they're not willing to strive for the mastery. And understanding, Paul told Timothy, you've got to strive for this mastery. And he said, there are no shortcuts to the ministry. There are no shortcuts. Now, there are some perceived shortcuts. And there are people who look and say, well, that young man's father has a name, or are they? There's a lot of times people that are not involved in ministry with their family growing up. They look at families that have a history of ministry, and they scream nepotism, 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 silver spoon. But in all reality, the ministry family, there has been thousands of hours of unspoken training in that young person's life. So when they arrive at adulthood, much of the hard knocks of ministry and the calling are already developed, because they sit around. Brother Huntley told you this last week. We're sitting around a table, and he was talking about young men and that were raised with the privilege of sitting around tables like we were sitting around, talking with great men. And
that was an out-of-body experience for me.
And so we were talking about what happens intrinsically. But I want you to know something, that that there's no silver spoon and there's no nepotistic position that can maintain a calling.
That's right.
Because if you're going to sustain a calling in the kingdom, you have to pay the price, whatever your name is. And there are people that don't have a famous name to help them out. But if they pay the price, they elevate to the top. And there are those that start with a famous name, and they depend upon that and not their own digging and their own seeking the mastery.
For character.
And if they don't seek the mastery on their own, it may appear for a season that they have a shot, that they're taking off. But never forget this. If you're interested in ministry and a calling, and we marvel at when we're driving at night and we see a shooting star. We marvel at a shooting star. Wow. And we look up and we see that go across there because it's phenomenal to see that. But a shooting star is really a falling star.
That's a dying star.
And by the time that you see that, it's a falling, dying star. Time we see it, it's been gone a long time.
It's burned out.
And a lot of time we look at someone who appears is simply just skyrocketing up. And this happens. That they're not allowed the privilege of taking enough time to find the mastery. And
good.
And if you don't spend those 10,000 hours, if you don't accomplish that mastery when the going gets tough, Paul said, not being a novice, lest you fall into the condemnation of the devil. When the pressure gets on, you find yourself overwhelmed with life and not able to sustain in the midst of the battle. When Paul says you want to be involved in the kingdom, you must strive for the mastery. And I'm not gonna try to compete with a marathon runner, because I haven't ran 100 hours in my lifetime, much less the 10,000 hours it's going to take to run in a marathon.
That's so good, Dad. I want to shift a little bit, venture off the notes, because that's where the good stuff happens. The notes are the guideposts, but sometimes the good stuff happens off the notes. So you when me and you talk about ministry, a lot of times we talk from our perspective, which is, for lack of another phrase, or I guess, yeah, that's probably the best way to say it, is we're the top guy. We're the guy that people see. Me and you are. We split that role right now as co-pastors, or senior pastor and pastor, but really it's kind of co right now. We're the top. But it happens because imagine Cardinal Church without Kayla and Alex. Like, while our ministry is up front and public, what they do behind the scenes sets us up, and Kayla holds our feet to the fire. Alex holds our feet. So what about this that we talked about last week that we didn't resolve? What about this plan? Kayla had to do that to us yesterday. When I think of the children of Israel in the Old Testament, their leader was Moses. And then obviously as they entered into the promised land, Moses couldn't enter into the promised land, so there's a transitional moment there. But long before there was a transitional moment, Moses couldn't do the work by himself. And so God, through all sovereignty, gave Moses the wisdom and spoke to Moses and said, gather the elders, and you're going to have elders, you're going to have men over tribes. You're going to have leaders underneath you to help move the people logistically, like not spiritually. Like, Moses, you're the spiritual head, but you're going to have people who are going to have to repeat what God gives you to say to the people, because technologically there was no mass text messaging. There was no PAs. Moses couldn't stand up on a rock and shout to all the people that couldn't hear him, but he could gather the leaders and they repeat what God had told Moses. And also they could organize on a local level, on a much smaller level, the children of Israel to move when the fire started moving, when the clouds started moving. So you and I talk from the perspective of the top of leadership, but so much of leadership and ministry is not at the top. More of that is at the bottom. It's, without a vision, the people perish, but it takes people to make the vision also come to life. So I think it's never, so many people aspire the ultimate tip, to be the pastor, to be the evangelist, to be the preacher gets the big gig, the big opportunity. But those opportunities never happen without faithful leaders in the church. I've talked about Kayla and Alex here because they do so much behind the scenes, but there's a lot of other leaders here at Conner Church that serve behind the scenes. So we've talked about from the tip of the spear. Now, what can someone do to prepare themselves just to be a faithful saint of God? The Old Testament the New Testament talks about the ministry of gifts, the ministry of help, of guidance. Let's talk about that.
There's a passage, and I wish I had the reference ready to recall, but there's a list of spiritual gifts.
Ministry of helps is what I meant.
And I'm going to mention the ministry of helps is prompted because right in the midst of prophecy and all these other tremendous spiritual gifts, there's this word called helps that's right in the middle of that list. And when you see these wonderful things, people prophesying and people, doing these big things, but smack in the middle, is that a good King James word?
It definitely gets the point across.
Okay. Right in the middle of all of these tremendous spiritual gifts is this little word called helps. And to maintain all these huge spiritual gifts, you've got to have somebody with the gift of helps. That is in the middle. That is the glue. That's the Velcro. That's the elastic of it all. That's kind of keeping it all together and moving it forward. And these administrative type gifts, these help type gifts, I'm not even talking about being a servant now. I'm talking about people who have developed skills. In ministry today, it seems as if young people that develop the gifts in internet technology and video and these kind of things, they are invaluable to a forward-moving ministry because you only need one pastor in a ministry. We've kind of got two. We're kind of a hybrid
one head
right
pastor.
now.
We're talking about senior pastor.
But it takes many helps to move it along, and I think that if long before you're at that place where you're the point, there's got to be this ability to have the ministry of helps. Let's make it real practical. If you pursue a calling, what have you developed in yourself that you bring to the table? Mm-hmm. What do you bring to the table? Well, say it's a music person, and they bring to the table a tremendous ability to carry a program, not just to sing in a service, but to carry a program, which in the day we live in, that's a lot of work. In my days, we just used to get the songbook, flip a page, and everybody sing. And
nope.
And it's a different time now. Or in Alex's case, she brings a lot of gifts to us, but one of her primary gifts is she helps us with all this online stuff. And so
online stuff, that's a good phrase.
Well,
social media. There
you go. And that she brings that to the table. So I would speak to a young person out there. Maybe you're considering Bible college, or maybe you are even in Bible college. What skills are you honing and developing in yourself that might bring yourself before a great man or a great team that would say, this young person has these skills, and that would round out what we're trying to accomplish in our presentation of the gospel.
Yeah, let me read this. This is Acts 6. You said you wish you could find it, so I just went to Google. I'm not going to read the whole passage, but Acts 6.
No, Google has great influence in apostolic movement. It does.
All right, Acts 6. It's not desirable for us. This is the 12 disciples speaking to the congregation. It's not desirable for us to neglect the word of God in order to serve tables. Now, it's not that the disciples were above serving tables, but the ministry and the church had grown so quickly that they couldn't serve tables, be hospitable, and also preach. So verse 3 says, but select from among you, brethren, 7 men or women in 2023 of good reputation, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, who we may put in charge of this task. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word. So I love how the disciples said, look, We need people who are organized, who can serve, who can make the ministry move forward while we are studying, while we are reaching people. But the logistics and the hospitality and the need and caring for people and making ministry move forward, that's needed. But before that, it has to be 7 people of good reputation. Like, I think so many times, it's not just in today's culture, it's a humanity thing. This has always been the case, that we put our gifts and our talents above our reputation. And I think this goes back to square one. Before we do anything in the kingdom of God, we have to be people of character and of reputation. Dad, you taught me, Kayla, we talk about it a lot. Her dad taught her, like, you only have one reputation. Your name, you have to guard it. Once you lose your reputation, you're done. You can rebuild it, but it might take a lifetime, and you still might not accomplish that. So, girls, y'all been quiet this episode. We want y'all's input on this conversation. Talk to us about what ministry is, not from the preacher aspect of standing behind a pulpit, but what is ministry to you, Kayla?
Ministry is discipline. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. You have to be disciplined so you have your personal talent, but if you're not disciplined within yourself, you'll bring those talents, but how am I trying to say this? You'll bring those talents to the table, but hold on, how am I trying to frame this without it?
Just say it and we'll smooth it over for you.
You have to be disciplined within yourself, or it'll be chaos on Sunday. And if you're not disciplined, like, okay, for instance, we were young and we wanted to go and do everything on a Saturday and wear ourselves out. And when we came in here on Sunday, we brought nothing to the table. Nothing, because we were worn out. We didn't give our first, to God first. So I think we have to be disciplined within our talents.
Yeah, I think it's so important. This is extremely practical, and I'm glad you brought that up. So many times we talk about the call of God, and we want to come into a service on a Sunday and the church operate at max capacity. Mm-hmm. But we forget that if we, the people, aren't at max capacity, the church isn't going to operate at max capacity. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times we talk of guarding the call about reputation and stuff that I just talked about, which is so needed, and it's a mandate. But sometimes guarding the call of God and cultivating the ministry that God has for us in the local church simply comes down to just bandwidth. Like, I can't do it all, so I have to prioritize. Is cramming my Friday night and all day Saturday with things, is that more important than me being at my absolute best on Sunday? Or is doing some of the things that I have to do on the weekend, because time is limited and people work, and the weekend is when they have to get things done, but filtering some of that out, the unimportant out, and making space to be home early on a Saturday night so they can rest well, so when they come to the house of God, they are prepared. They're not tired. They can smile on a Sunday. We talked about this. Like, this is a big deal to me right now. Like, we have to have a smile on our face. The church should be the happiest place in the world. Yeah. If we don't get up and greet the people with a smile on our face, if we say welcome to church and don't have a smile, if we're singing about revival but we're standing like soldiers, if we're opening doors and we're talking into this, we're prioritizing the people who are members of the church over the guests who are coming in, like, we're not prepared. And a lot of times that happens not because we have bad intentions, because we don't. It happens because we haven't taken time to guard the call that God has for us. Like, I'm just an usher. No, you're not just an usher. You are the hands and feet of Jesus. cultivate that call. You can't greet people at your absolute best if you're out till 3 a.m. running all over Houston doing whatever you're doing. Hopefully you're not out that late because nothing good happens past 10, right, Dad? That's what you used to tell me. But this is young adults. Please listen to me. Like, I'm still young at heart, and I'm leaving the young adult phase. But guard the call of God. Everybody wants a poppin' church, and sometimes young adults, if our church isn't popping, we go find another church that is. How about you just guard the call of God that you have and make your church popping? Like you be the difference maker. Like the hand of God is on you. He's blessed you with gifts and talents and calling and abilities. Cultivate it. Use discipline. Go to bed. Wake up early. I'm sorry, babe. I'm not used to sitting at a small table like this. So somebody texted you this week saying, hey, this is what I serve. This is the area I serve in the church. How can I get better at it? And you just said, wake up early and do these 3 steps. And it's so far from spiritual, but it makes a humongous difference.
You mentioned I'm just an usher. But when you bring that, your position, the position of an usher, say someone working in the parking lot, or someone opening the front door of the church, or somebody holding a sign in front of the church, we're glad you're here.
Love it.
You know, you've got to realize that if that's where your task in serving today, and there's a guest that arrives that's hungry for God, you are the very face. You are the first impression that this person has on the gospel presentation that's going to happen past those doors. Mm-hmm. Think about it. And so if you operate with that, with the best gifting and the most developed talent, and if you are just an usher, arrive at the level of mastery. Mm-hmm. You cannot arrive at a mastery level of anything and stay there. Yeah. Because as soon as you arrive at a mastery level, you're going to be invited to a different table. And when you sit down at that table, you're going to be challenged to arrive to a new level of mastery. And you
bloom where you're planted is what you're saying.
Well, absolutely. I preached at a church, in the past, and when I stepped in the pulpit, there were people from every church in the town and in the whole area. And because I was familiar with the area, and I recognized all these people from different places, and I felt like, man, I'm standing in the middle of the mixed multitude, and it was a weird feeling. And I said, some of you need to decide. I just got bold. They asked me to come to miss my Sunday morning, to be there in their Sunday morning. I said, well, maybe this is why I'm here. I said, some of you people need to quit moving around and grow in the pot God got you planted in, and quit looking for the latest fad and the latest new thing, but grow and develop where you're at, and let God use you and develop you here. And don't show up at the next new thing that's happening. I didn't get invited back. But the fact of the matter is,
that was a good word though, Dad,
is we must grow in the pot God gave us. And if we outgrow our pot, God's got a way.
He'll replant us.
He's got a way of moving us to the next place.
That's so good. All right, so we've been going 41 minutes, but we have to record 2 episodes, so somehow we'll break this episode in 2 pieces. So
okay. Because
next week we're not recording. Unless you want to record by yourself.
Well, you really... I know how to push the green button.
That's good. All right, so let's talk about pursuing.
Hey guys, thank you for listening to Hope for the Soul podcast. Before you go, like and comment. We want to know what you're getting out of the podcast. Leave us a review. Subscribe. We do not want you to miss a thing. And lastly, share us with a friend you think needs to hear this. Our goal is to deliver content that will give hope. Regardless of what is going on in the world, we believe that Jesus